I want to bring into this conversation the former Wisconsin Democratic Party chair, Ben Wickler, who says he can save the Democratic Party. He spells it all out in his New York Times bestseller, This is the Plan, How to End America's Meltdown and Save Democracy. Ben, it's nice to see you. Usually we have these conversations when I'm in Wisconsin. I'm sorry we're doing this one remotely today, but let's break it down here. Could Francesca Hong, this sort of Democratic socialist, further to the left than some of her competitors in the primary, could she cost Democrats what is widely viewed as a winnable governorship there?
Tom Tiffany is the most extreme general election nominee the Republican Party has put up in Wisconsin. And he's someone that any of the Democratic candidates is going to be on track to beat. It's going to be a fight. Wisconsin elections start with both sides at 48%. But the thing about Wisconsin Democrats is that once the nominee is chosen, everyone unites around the nominee and goes to bat. When people know that Tom Tiffany is the reason why they're losing their health insurance because he voted to cut $1 trillion from healthcare, when they find out that he tried to overturn the 2020 election as part of Trump's coup attempt in 2020, when they find out that he's voted for and supported abortion bans left and right, they will do everything they can to bring everyone they know to the polls to support the Democratic nominee in November.
But Ben, to be clear, as you know very well, certainly in states like Wisconsin right now, it's not just about rallying the Democrats against the rallied Republicans. This is about getting those independents right in the middle who are sort of go either way, depending on the candidates that are before them, to make a decision. And so the question, I guess, is having a candidate who's on the further left flank of the party the best bet to defeat a Republican, even if he's vulnerable in November?
Voters are going to decide on the nominee. I'm an advisor to the state party. The party's neutral in the primary. What I do know about the voters who might go either way in November is that the number one thing on their mind is how darn expensive it is to fill their gas tank, how frustrating it is to have a local hospital close in rural Wisconsin, how infuriated they are that filling their grocery cart is unaffordable. Tom Tiffany has been part of every one of those problems. And whether it's Francesca Hong or David Crowley or any other candidate, they and Democrats in the legislature are laser focused on affordability for working Wisconsinites. That is a winning message, no matter what part of the Democratic Party you come from. And it's one that Tom Tiffany is terrified of.
Can a party, the Democrats, be powered to victory by a base that doesn't really trust that party to win anymore? There's a lot of frustration with the Democratic establishment right now.
The biggest anger that so many people have is the sense, first of all, that the country's not working for them. And secondly, that leaders aren't doing anything about it. That creates an energy for change. You can see that in primaries. You also see that in general elections. People want someone new who's going to bring a different energy. None of the current Democratic candidates is there to fight for the status quo. They're all fighting for change. They're all mad about the same thing that voters are, a problem that Tom Tiffany is a part of creating. And I think what we're going to see is people who fought against each other in the primary join hands. You can see it in Michigan right now. You're going to see it in Wisconsin tomorrow to make sure that we're going to fight and win in November at every level of the ballot. It's not just the governor. It's the state legislative races. It's House races. Add those things together and you can create a Democratic trifecta in Wisconsin that will bring down the cost of healthcare, expand it for everyone, and put a check on this rogue administration that is trampling both democracy, people's freedoms and rights, and the economy at every turn.
So I want to get from you, if I can, a sense. You said America's meltdown did not start with President Trump descending the golden escalator. It started with Project Red Map flipping state legislative seats across the country in 2010. Why, in your view, are there sort of down ballot races, the legislature, so critical in the electoral process?
Well, look at the mess we're in as a country right now and ask, how did we get here? It began with this wave of gerrymandering that's driven by state legislatures. It came out of voter suppression that was driven by state legislatures and Republican governors like Scott Walker before him, and now Tom Tiffany would want to do the same thing. Union busting, attacks on working people, money in politics, and Citizens United. All that stuff flows from 2010, and it's the future as well in 2030, unless we have people who believe in democracy and a country that works for working people win in states like Wisconsin at the state level to ensure that Trump can't steal the election in 2028. The plan in This is the Plan is to make sure we're winning the offices that write the rules of how politics actually works, and then change the system to put the people in charge of the United States of America instead of a tiny cabal of right-wing billionaires, the folks like Elon Musk who want to call the shots for everyone else.
So to be clear, is in your view, is this the need for a national strategy or a state-by-state plan?
Well, I argue not for a single 50-state strategy, but rather 50 state strategies. It looks different in different places. Right now, Wisconsin has a shot to win the governor, re-elect attorney general, win both chambers of the state legislature. There are other states where the only hope is to break a Republican supermajority. In North Carolina, this fall, critical election for U.S. Senate, but also state Supreme Court. In every state, there's some kind of fight that no one's paying attention to, but where if a few thousand more people throw their shoulders against the wheel, we can actually make a difference that will last for years. And that is my call to everybody, is to find those races now. In Wisconsin, the number one priority is beating Tom Tiffany, the election denier who wants to be in charge of election certification in 2028. But it might be different in the neck of the woods where any particular viewer lives. If everyone focuses on the thing that can make the biggest difference, it can add up to a sea change in American politics. And that has to start this November.
I want to get back to sort of where we started this conversation. A lot of Democrats right now, they agree with you. All they care about is winning back some of these seats, these governors' mansions, and beyond. The Senate, obviously, such a big priority here. But I think there are a lot of more moderate Democrats right now that are anxious that the party may be wasting this opportunity because they're pursuing people who are further to the left here. I know that you don't take a position on that in particular. But what do you say to those folks who are worried right now that the energy is on the far side of the party, much like it was on the far side of the Republican Party, but for Democrats, it may not be able to pull enough other people with them?
Well, there's very often we kind of get involved in these conversations about left versus center left. If you look at who performs really well in elections, part of it is whether their point of view matches their states. Lots of states have a huge spectrum of views. Wisconsin's one of those states. We have Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson. We had Joe McCarthy and Fighting Bob La Follette. There's also questions of, can your candidate deliver a message effectively? Can they unite a coalition? Can they attend to the relationships and think through how to bring people together? Those are not really about ideology. That's about having a nominee and having a party and having a movement and an infrastructure that is focused on doing the things that generate victory. And all that stuff is stuff where people can not only vote, they can roll up their sleeves and get involved. The person who matters most to a voter is probably whether their neighbor talked to them the day before the election. And everybody has neighbors.
So, no, I apologize for the interruption, but I just want to be clear, though, because some of the polling was compelling. Marquette Law School right there in Wisconsin said Democratic socialists are viewed negatively by more than half of the state's registered voters. I think that's where some of the concern comes from right now.
I think the central question is going to be what's on a voter's mind if they're unsure who to vote for. What makes them make a final decision when they're in the voting booth? And if that question is, can I afford to fill up my gas tank and buy food to bring home from the grocery store at the same time? Then candidates with a strong affordability message are going to win this November. And that's what you get from any of the Democrats on the ticket. I think if the question is, how can I best support Donald Trump as he tries to dismember American democracy, then it's Tom Tiffany's election. But I don't see I don't see any data point in any poll that says people are looking for another rubber stamp for Donald Trump in Wisconsin or in any other battleground state.
This is a good conversation. We're going to have plenty of time to continue talking about it. Can I ask you a quick question? The reports that you might run for Senate in 2028, are you running?
I'm not going to make any decisions about the future until after the November election.
Don't you have to start a campaign now, though? I mean, it takes a lot of work, Ben.
Look, this is a hair on fire, roll up your sleeves moment. You can see my book. We have a fire extinguisher on the cover. The country's on fire right now, and this is all hands on deck for November. We can figure out the presidential nominee. We can figure out every other race for 2028 after this election is over.
Fine. Let's get through this election. Well, you're always welcome back here on State of Play. Ben Wikler, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being here.